Hey gang, Stephen Marshall, KYLandlordlaw.com, back with another update because it has been a wild week already. Starting this week, non-payment of rent eviction cases resumed in the courts. Eviction protests broke out, kind of. At least one judge's home was vandalized. And then last night, the governor signed a new executive order on evictions. So, a lot's gone on already, so let's take a look at all of it, starting with the non-payment cases. Those resumed in the courts yesterday throughout the state. The Supreme Court's order in late July allowed non-payment evictions to be filed beginning on August 1. And so what the courts did is they started putting on the non-payment cases on their docket that had been filed back in March, but that had not been heard since the shutdowns. In response, several tenant advocates in Lexington showed up outside the courthouse yesterday and protested against evictions resuming. They had around 10 to 15 people there, a few signs, and a bullhorn. And the Fayette County Sheriff's Department was ready for them, clearly. They had multiple officers stationed outside the courthouse and then on each floor of the courthouse with eyes on the event, kind of monitoring what was going on. And unfortunately, it didn't amount to much. A few people spoke, and they had a few chants, and they were gone after about an hour or so. And what went on inside the courthouse really wasn't much more eventful either. I had 16 cases on the docket. 12 of them were dismissed. Okay, 3/4 were dismissed because the landlord and tenant had it worked out. A similar story today. I had 25 cases. 21 of them were dismissed. And then for the remainder of the week, I have 54 more cases. 41 of them are going to be dismissed already, and more will end up being dismissed by the time we get to the hearing. So that's what's happening in the courts right now. The balances on those who are actually getting a judgment entered against them is on average around $5,000. I'm seeing lots of balances of close to $7,000. So if you're being evicted right now, it's simply because you haven't paid your rent in a long, long time. So what you're going to hear in the coming days from these tenant advocates is that tens of thousands of people are being evicted. And that is simply not true. Okay? Here's the truth about what's happening. The people behind these eviction protests believe evictions are immoral. Okay? Period. Full stop. They believe even during normal times, no one should be allowed to be evicted. Okay? And so what's going on right now is they're simply promoting a fear of COVID in order to advance an agenda that they've been trying to push for years. Okay? They keep throwing the term out there, global pandemic. They use that every single time they talk about their agenda to stop evictions. Well, that was their agenda before anyone had ever heard of COVID, and so they're just using COVID now to gain something that they've been trying to gain for years. And here's how they're doing it, okay? First of all, they're screaming to anyone who will listen that tens of thousands of Kentuckians are going to lose their housing. That's simply false, okay? The numbers make it clear that large groups of people are not going to be put out on the street. This is a point that I have emphasized over and over in my media interviews. In fact, I'll link one here at the bottom I had with WLEX yesterday. And that should be made clear by the numbers I gave you earlier. Okay, of my cases this week, about 3/4 of them are going to end up being dismissed. That means people are not being put out of their homes. Second strategy, they are going to abuse the court process. Okay, not use, abuse. They are telling tenants to request a jury trial in every eviction case. Okay, I'm not making that up. That's directly from the mouths of some of the tenant advocates, okay, in the newspaper. Now, it doesn't matter if the tenant has any actual case against the landlord. It doesn't matter if there are no factual issues in dispute for a jury to decide. They're still telling the tenants to request a jury trial in order to delay the process because no jury trials are being held until November. So a jury trial delays the process and it increases the cost the landlord has to pay to evict the tenant. So they're telling those tenants, request a jury trial every time, okay, and you'll get to stay in your home longer, and the landlord may just get tired and give up. I've had to deal with a couple of those already, including one this morning. Then finally, the final strategy, and this is the worst of all, they're going to try to intimidate you. They're going to try to intimidate those involved in the process. Last night, protesters vandalized the home of a sitting judge in Louisville by putting trash, old mattresses, and other items in the yard, in the judge's yard, with written spray-painted messages about evictions. Okay? They want to scare you. They want to back you down. And I know landlords who are afraid. Okay? They're scared of that happening to them. And all I can tell you is I get it. But we cannot back down. We cannot let people who would try to intimidate us succeed. Okay? But because that only emboldens them more. That said, whatever precautions you feel like you need to take, certainly take them. All right. Now to the part that everybody wants to know about, okay? The governor's executive order on eviction. So after all that went down yesterday evening, the governor signed a new executive order on evictions. Okay, it had, I think, about 6 parts to it, but really 3 key points for us. Effective today, August 25th, 2020, all prior executive orders on evictions are rescinded. So that's good news. That means that even according to the governor, all evictions are allowed to move forward and law enforcement officers are allowed to enforce eviction orders. Okay, so that clears that up. That's a good thing. Now, the second part, effective today, August 25th, 2020, all residential landlords must give at least 30 days notice to evict for non-payment of rent. And the notice has to include your contact information and then must request to meet with the tenant to confer about the matter. Okay, that's point number 2. A 30-day notice to evict for non-payment of rent. You must include your contact information and request a meeting with the tenant to confer about the matter. And then point number 3, and this is going to be very controversial, no penalties, late fees, or interest related to the non-payment of rent may be charged from March 6th of this year through December 31st of this year. Okay, March 6th to December 31st, no interest, no late fees, no penalties related to the non-payment of rent. Okay, now this applies to every residential property. Okay, this is not just CARES Act properties. Okay, this is every residential property. Now, what does this mean for evictions that have already been filed? Okay, let me start with the disclaimer that I cannot know for sure how any particular judge is going to respond to this order. Okay, I'm going to give you my best guess on how most judges will handle it. My expectation is that this order will not affect non-payment cases that have already been filed as it pertains to the 30-day notice requirement. Okay, that part of the order doesn't go into effect until today. Okay, it's not retroactive. So if you have a non-payment of rent case that has already been filed, I expect it's going to move forward as usual because the 30-day notice requirement does not take effect until today, August 25th. Now, on late fees, that's a different story because the portion of the order that addresses late fees is retroactive. Okay, it applies from March 6th through the end of the year. So my expectation is that you may be prohibited from charging and collecting late fees on cases that you've already filed. Now, I said this is going to be controversial because it seems like an obvious overreach by the governor. Okay, it's pretty audacious for him to attempt to interfere in private contracts between citizens. Okay, that's something that I've said all along. It's one thing for him to give orders to law enforcement. Okay, it's one thing for the federal government to give direction to properties where they back the mortgage. It's an entirely different level for a government official to step into private housing and private contracts and try to change the terms of those contracts. And on top of that, it's not just an interference in private contracts between private citizens, it's an end run around state law and around the state legislature. We have a statute here in Kentucky that applies throughout the entire state that says that unpaid rent accrues interest at 6% per year. Okay, well, the governor's order basically says that doesn't apply from March 6th through the end of the year. So this interference in private contracts and trying to do an end run around the legislature, I expect that's going to be challenged and struck down, but for now, it stands. So what do we start doing as of today? On cases that have not yet been filed, courts may require you to issue a 30-day notice to vacate starting today. Okay? Again, I cannot guarantee how any particular judge is going to respond to this order. Some may ignore it. Okay? They may cite separation of powers and may allow you to proceed with the 7-day notice. Okay? Others may recognize the order as having force of law and require you to give a 30-day notice starting today. So if you want to be on the safer side and be assured that your eviction is going to go forward, if it's not already been filed, start giving 30-day notices as of today. But you need to remember that it has to include your contact information and must request a meeting with the tenant to confer about the situation. Okay? Now, the order does not require you to settle the case. Okay? It does not require you to set up a payment plan. It does not require you to defer rent. It does not require you to accept a lesser amount. It simply requires you to attempt to meet with your tenant to discuss the matter. Now, you are going to need to use reasonable efforts to meet with the tenant. Okay? And you'll want to document your efforts at doing so. Okay? So use reasonable efforts to meet with your tenant to discuss the situation and document your efforts to do so. Okay? And then the final part of the governor's order was he announced that $15 million in federal money would be used to establish an eviction relief fund. Okay? Now, the interesting part was that he also stated that this money may be used to create statewide programs for eviction proceedings. My guess that he's thinking along the lines of more programs like the eviction diversion program that was created in Jefferson County. I don't like the sound of any program that messes with the eviction process, but we'll see what develops here. So the big news of the day is that the governor wants you to give a 30-day notice to pay or vacate and to meet with your tenants during that 30-day period to try to work things out. Now, I know that most of you all have already been trying to work things out during this entire ordeal. So to you folks, I say keep up the good work. I'll update you as we learn how this order is being handled by the different courts in Kentucky. And in the coming days, I'll be creating a 30-day notice that complies with the governor's new order. If you'd like to buy one of those, just shoot me an email to smarshall@trippleslaw.com. It's only Tuesday of this week, and it's been wild already. So I think that's enough for today. Hope you all are doing well. I'm sure we'll talk soon as things develop. Have a great rest of your week.